My name is Grant Kramer, and I am Professor Emeritus at the University of Nevada, Reno. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is wine and the composition of wine. So let's get to it. So what are the components of a wine? Well, let's first compare grapes and then wine. So grapes are made up of 75% water. At harvest time, at our normal harvest time, approximately 24% sugar. And the rest is largely organic acids, only about 1%. And then we have less than 1% of a lot of miscellaneous metabolites. Now in wine, it's composed of 84% water. And again, approximately 13% alcohol, depending on how much sugar was in the grapes before fermentation started. And we can then include 3% of other ingredients or components. So what are some of those components? I want to thank Andy Waterhouse for his excellent analyses of wines in the past. On the left-hand side, we see a copy from his webpage of different ingredients, and on the right, we see a pie chart representing a very similar concentration of different ingredients in a book that he published on understanding wine chemistry. These ingredients are in concentrations of milligrams per liter. Acetaldehyde is 70 milligrams per liter, whereas glycerol is 7,000. We have about 500 milligrams per liter of higher alcohol, 300 of sorbitol and mannitol, about 80 of sulfites, about 6,000 milligrams per liter of acids, amino acids, which are different from the acids we were just referring to, or the organic acids, 60 milligrams of esters, 1,200 milligrams of minerals, 1,800 milligrams of phenols, 750 milligrams of sugar, and 400 milligrams of volatile acidity. Of course, these are average measurements for an average wine. On the right, you can visualize this a little bit more by looking at the pie chart and the size of the slices. And we can see slight differences from the chart on the left. And we have a few additional things such as methanol that are added to this list, with about 100 milligrams per liter of methanol. So note, there are a lot of different components to the wine, but they are in very small quantities, adding to the characteristics of that wine. We're going to go into these components in a little bit more detail now. So carbohydrates are carbon-based molecules. Sugars are the most obvious ones that contribute sweetness to the wine. Some of these sugars are fermentable, such as sucrose, glucose, fructose, and galactose, and some are non-fermentable, such as arabinose, which comes from the glycosides in your cell wall pectins in the cells of the berry. We also have sugar alcohols, so another form of carbohydrates. These may contribute to mouthfeel. They are compounds such as glycerol, mannitol, which can contribute some sweetness, taste to the wine, arabitol, sorbitol, which also contributes some sweetness, and inositol. There are sugar acids like gluconic and galacturonic acids. They may contribute 50% of the sweetness intensity of sugars in their own form. And sometimes they may actually add some sourness. So there are other things other than just sugars that contribute to sweetness of the wine. You may taste a sweet wine, but all of the sugars may be fermented. Now, it might be slightly sweet. It's not going to be super sweet like it would be with a lot of sugar in it. And then we have polysaccharides. Those are molecules with many glucose units connected to each other. And that's why they're called poly. So they're saccharides is sugar, poly is many. So they're long chains of polysaccharides, which contribute to mouthfeel in the wine. Cellulose being one of the more famous polysaccharides, which is the major component of your cell walls. But other cell wall components are pectins, and hemicelluloses. Now, I'm not going to get into the molecular details of these compounds, but they all contribute something to the mouthfeel of the wine. Acids, so we have organic acids, which are sour tasting. Some are more sour tasting than others. For example, malate is the acid that's characteristic of malic acid. Malate is just a ionized form or name for malic acid. And tartrate would be the name for tartaric acid, or citrate for citric acid, etc. So malic acid is well known and named after the apple acid, malic acid, and Malus, the apple species. Tartaric acid is an acid fairly unique and in large quantities in grapes, but it doesn't have near the sourness, taste, or intensity as malic acid. And then there are smaller components of citric acid, lactic acid, succinate, acetate, which, as you well know, can cause that pungent, stinky aroma of vinegar. And then there are minor volatile fermentation-derived acids, such as butanoic, decanoic, hexanoic, octanoic fatty acids, which can give a fatty, rancid flavor or aroma. And I mentioned amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. Most of them are fermented and below the taste threshold. So most of the proteins during fermentation are degraded into amino acids, and the yeast utilizes amino acids for their own metabolism. One amino acid that contributes a sweet characteristic is called proline. Glutamate, another amino acid, contributes to the umami taste, that taste of sort of meaty taste. There are also biogenic amines, which are formed during fermentation, histamine being one of them, which can be a cause of headaches in wines. There's also putrescine and tyramine. Ethyl carbamate, a carcinogen, can be formed in reaction of urea and ethanol in bottles when they are exposed to high temperatures. And sometimes you have PR proteins, PR standing for pathogenesis related. These are proteins that are produced oftentimes in reaction to a pathogen and are more abundant under those circumstances. These are not degraded by the yeast and can remain in the wine afterwards, contributing to the protein haze that can form in your wine bottles. This is usually seen in white wines. When the bottle is chilled in the refrigerator, you will see either some tartaric acid crystals forming, which will be clear at the bottom of the bottle, or you can have a sort of hazy suspended characteristic in the wine. And this is largely contributed to by PR proteins. We did some analyses on this. We found in our white wines that drought stress seemed to enhance the hazy characteristics of some of our white wines. And when we analyzed this on 2D gels, ran the proteins out on the gels, we were able to identify these as largely PR proteins. So they are a major contributor to haziness in white wines. So another very important class of compounds in red wine, but not so much on white wine, because red wine has a lot of these and white wine does not, are the class of phenolics. So phenolics or phenols come from the berry skins and the seeds in the fruit of the grape, and can also have some contribution from the oak barrels that we use to age the wine in. So phenols are compounds that I've talked about before in the health benefits of wine, the positive health effects of wine, particularly red wine. And we have a compound here that is a phenol, which is a 6-carbon ring structure with a hydroxyl on the end. And this is the basic component of what a phenol is. And then we have flavonoid compounds or Propanoids, there are several different names, that are basically three-ring structures. We have an A, B, and C ring, and there are lots of different R group or molecular groups that are attached to these rings and different components to give different groups of phenols. So we have flavonols, we have flavones, we have flavonones, we have flavonols, we have isoflavones, and we have anthocyanidin. These are very complex molecules, as you can gather, and each plant species will produce different kinds. Grapes have over 300 different kinds of phenolics in them. There are compounds in grapes that are similar to compounds in other plants, such as in chocolate or coffee or tea. These are antioxidant compounds. They act to scavenge up free radicals in your body. So they are a source of health compounds. And they all have different effects, and they do have synergistic effects between them. So this is a very complex chemistry and has a very complex chemistry in our body. So under the flavonoids, we have the anthocyanins, which are the red colors, pigments that we find in grapes. We have the flavonthiols, which are acting as sunscreens to protect the cells from excessive light radiation, particularly UV radiation. These include the catechins, which you also find in tea, and the proanthocyanidins or condensed tannins. We also have the flavonols. Now, I'm not going to go into the differences as to what these molecules, how they are different, but they have been categorized by scientists, and they have different biochemical pathways. We also have other phenolic compounds that are called the hydroxycinnamates. We have stilbenes, which resveratrol is one of the famous ones, and we have benzoic acid. And again, the composition, that is the different kinds of phenolics and the amount of each of these phenolics will vary within plant species, but also within the grape varieties that we're talking about. So for example, Pinot Noir is known to have the highest concentration of resveratrol. Now we know quite a bit of the biochemistry of this pathway because it's such an important pathway in plants. This is a basic outline showing you that phenylpropanoid pathway. And it really starts at the beginning here with phenylalanine, which is an amino acid. And it's the start of this with this enzyme called PAL, or phenylalanine ammonia lyase, that triggers the entire phenylpropanoid pathway. Up higher up, these are precursors to this pathway. And then this branches out very quickly into all sorts of the different classes of molecules that we just talked about, each being controlled by different enzymes. And in grapes, this is very, very well studied now. And we know many of the steps that go into the biochemical pathways that generates these different kinds of molecules. And we know the enzymes, and we know the transcription factors listed here in blue, which are involved in enhancing or increasing the production of those compounds. So scientists have been studying that very carefully. This is one of the reasons white grapes are white, is because this pathway for anthocyanin biosynthesis is blocked, and they can't produce those compounds, and therefore they show the color of the green or white grape, as we call it. So I mentioned that there are many different kinds of phenolics. Some phenolics we've studied more than others. The simpler compounds, such as resveratrol, seen here in this picture, are well known to help protect against heart disease or stroke and cancer and even Alzheimer's disease. They're mostly found in red wines, although you can find a small amount of it in some of the white wine grape varieties such as Pinot Gris or even Chardonnay, but it's much, much lower concentrations than it is in the red wines. These compounds can form multiple units, shown in this figure, where N refers to any number of units connected to each other. So in this one, we have a trimer with just 3 of these units, but you can have 10, 12, or even more. It becomes very difficult to measure such large structures and to understand their chemistry. We also have volatile phenol. One important one is glycol, which is giving a smoky or sweet smell to the wine. So when a molecule is volatile, then we can sense it in our nose as an aroma. There are other compounds such as 4-ethylglycol, which gives a spicy clove or even the Brett aroma, which is considered undesirable. There's 4-vinyl phenol, which is medicinal or phenolic. There's 4-ethylphenol, which gives a leathery or horse stable or Brett aroma. And then there's vanillin, which is giving us the vanilla aroma that we smell. Many of these come from oak or the aging of the wine in the oak, and these compounds leach into the wine to add flavor components to the wine. Some desirable, and in some cases, maybe not so desirable. So sometimes there are precursors from the grapes themselves that contribute to these components. So the microbial activities of Brettanomyces or Brett can use the hydroxycinnamates to produce that 4-ethylphenol and that 4-ethylglycol to produce this off flavor aroma. But that's not coming in directly from the grape, but from the Brettanomyces yeast that is metabolizing the grape juice. There are higher alcohols. We have volatile alcohols that are derived from amino acids. They're byproducts of these metabolism of amino acids when nitrogen is low. There's isobutanol, there's isoamyl alcohol, and there's 2-phenylethanol, to name just a few. The 2-phenylethanol can give a rose or honey aroma. The isoamyl alcohol is often described as solvent or fusel. And again, the isobutanol is more of a solvent aroma. We have another class of compounds called esters. These are the compounds that you would smell in flowers, perfumes perhaps, or fruits. So these are very common characteristics of the odors representing banana or rose or any other kinds of things that you can think of. Such compounds are labeled here as isoamyl acetate, which is banana, main component in banana, isoamyl butyrate, which is the main component in pear, or methyl butyrate, which is pineapple aroma. We can also get the reaction of carboxylic acids with alcohols to form these esters, in this case, ethyl hexanoate, which is green apple aroma, or 2-phenyl ethyl acetate, which gives that honey, rose, or flowery aroma. All these compounds, again, are volatile and detected in our retronasal cavities in our nose. That will be a subject of another video where I will go into some detail as to how we detect these compounds. Wine being stored can increase or decrease these volatile compounds. So some are not volatile at the time of making of the wine, but become volatile later on as those compounds are broken down and volatilized. So we can get fruity aromas developing later in a wine and other fruity aromas disappearing because they were present in the wine in the beginning, but now broken down and are no longer available as that compound that we can detect. There's also the compound gamma-lactone, which is a cyclic ester, usually coming from the oak. Another important ester that we often detect in red wines is ethyl-3-methylpentanoate, or strawberry aroma. So here's a process by which esters are formed. You have a carboxylic acid here combined with an alcohol, and you can get an esterification process going that makes this into an ester. And this ester can be broken down by hydrolysis back into alcohol or carboxylic acid. So these are equilibrium reactions that are going on back and forth all the time in the wine. Other compounds found in wines are aldehydes and ketones. So here's an example of what an aldehyde is, a carbon with an oxygen, double bonded oxygen and a hydrogen, and a ketone, which replaces that hydrogen with another carbon or R group. These compounds originate in fermentation and are produced by oxidative reactions. some of these compounds arise after fermentation is complete. We have other aldehydes we know about are diacetyl, which is the butter aroma, or acetaldehyde, which is fruity, nutty, to even rotting apples aroma if you get different concentrations of it, or you have different sensitivities to that compound. We have green grass or fruity aromas that come under 2-methyl-butanol. These are formed as higher alcohols and then they can be oxidized into aldehydes. So we have phenyl acetaldehyde, which is actually a floral aroma. And then 2-hexanal gives us this grassy aroma. So there are a variety of different compounds in wine. There are even volatile sulfur compounds. The most obvious one is hydrogen sulfide, which we associate with rotten eggs, but there are dimethyl sulfides, like what are found in asparagus or cabbage or even truffles. We have 3-mercaptohexane-1-ol, which is the grapefruit or passion fruit aroma. And then we have 2-furomethanethiol, which is the aroma of roasted coffee. So these compounds are generated by microbes in the wine, yeast largely, but there could be even bacteria in their wine that could contribute to that. They can give you these aromas of rotten egg, rubber, garlic, onion, tropical fruit, citrus, coffee. Some of these styles are originating from the grape variety itself. So for example, the 3-mercaptohexane-1-ol found in Sauvignon Blanc and Gewürztraminer and Cabernet Sauvignon is produced in the grape variety. Okay, now we have another very important class of compounds called isoprenoids. These are volatile compounds that largely contribute to the particular grape variety's specific aromas in a wine. And they come through from the grape itself. They're produced in the grape through the Isoprenoid biosynthetic pathway. And again, there are multiple kinds of compounds here, all of which have different volatiles and all of which we detect a little bit differently. So we have what are called monoterpenoids. These are C10 molecules, or sesquiterpenoids, which are C15. And we have some C13 more isoprenoids. Some examples of the monoterpenoids are linalool, which produces a floral or citrus aroma, or citronellol, which is rose or citrus characteristics as well. Sesquiterpenoids are rotundone, which gives you this black pepper aroma found in Australian Shiraz wines, or farnesol, which gives you floral or rose compounds. Some of the C13 isoprenoids are beta-damascenone, which give you floral, cooked apple, and quince. This is a very common compound in wines. Beta-ionone, which give you violet, wood, or raspberry characteristics. And then TDN, or 1,1,6-trimethyl-1,2-dihydronaphthalene, which I had to put my glasses on to read that one. And that is giving you kerosene or petrol characteristics. So one other little interesting bit about C13 isoprenoids is they are one of my favorite compounds because I love the fruity aromas in flowers and fruits. These are produced in the chloroplasts of the cell. Berry skin cells have chloroplasts in them. The skin is an important component for biosynthesis in grapes. So in conclusion, wines are very complex, containing up to 9,000 different compounds in the wine at very low concentrations. Many of these compounds are derived from the grapes, but many of them are derived from the grape precursors after being metabolized by the yeast. So these compounds contribute to the color, the taste, the aroma, and the mouthfeel of your wine. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation about the complexity of wines, and it furthers your interest. I recognize that this is a bit of an academic presentation, but there's a lot more to it than what I presented today. In addition, I will be presenting in the next video sensory analysis of wines. That is, how do we taste wines? Not only the physical steps of tasting wine in a glass, but also how we detect those aromas and flavors in our mouth and in our retronasal cavities. So have a great day and maybe even a good glass of wine.